She watched her sister accept the ring. She smiled. She clapped. She said nothing when her mother squeezed Victoria's hand and whispered, "This is what we raised you for." Nobody looked at Elena, not once. She was used to that. But then the most powerful, most feared man in that room did something nobody expected. He stood up, cleared his throat, and looked directly at her. Not Victoria, her, Elena Whitmore, the forgotten daughter. And in front of everyone, he said 4 words that changed everything. If this story already has you hooked, hit subscribe, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, and don't you dare leave before the end. The dinner had been her mother's idea. Of course it had. Diane Whitmore had been planning this evening for 3 months. She had changed the centerpiece flowers twice, fired the first catering company, and personally hand-addressed 62 invitations on cream-colored stationery that cost more per sheet than most people spent on groceries. Every detail had been engineered, every seat assigned, every conversation pre-approved, and Elena had been seated at the far end of the table, near the kitchen, where the noise was. She didn't argue. She never argued. She simply arrived early, straightened her chair, folded her napkin into her lap, and watched the room fill with people who barely knew her name. Victoria walked in at 7:15, 14 minutes after the stated arrival time, because Victoria always made an entrance, and an entrance required an audience. She was wearing midnight blue. Her hair was swept up perfectly. She smiled the way people smile when they know they're being photographed, even when there's no camera. Elena watched from her end of the table as their mother rushed forward, took both of Victoria's hands and said loud enough for the room to hear, "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart." He's going to be speechless. Victoria laughed that soft, practiced laugh and said, "Mother, stop. You're embarrassing me." She didn't look embarrassed at all. Elena picked up her water glass and took a slow sip. The man they were all waiting for arrived at 7:30 exactly on time. Adrian Volkov did not make an entrance the way Victoria did. He simply walked in, and the room responded to him like a field responding to a shift in weather. Conversation shortened, postures straightened, eyes cut toward him, and then quickly looked away the way people look at something that makes them instinctively cautious. He was not what Elena had expected. She had heard the name, of course. Everyone in their circle had heard the name. Adrian Volkov, 38 years old, Russian-American, a man whose legitimate business interests spanned real estate shipping and private equity, and whose other interests were discussed only in careful, quiet voices. He was powerful in the way that old money is powerful, not loudly, not flashily, but with a weight that you felt in your chest before you could explain why. He shook her father's hand. He kissed her mother's cheek. He turned to Victoria, and he smiled a controlled, measured smile, and he said, "You look well." Victoria beamed like she'd just been handed the sun. Elena looked back down at her plate. The dinner moved the way these dinners always moved, in careful, choreographed waves. First course, polite conversation about business, about travel, about nothing that mattered. Elena answered the questions directed at her. There were 3 and otherwise remained quiet, observing. That was her role in this family. She had played it so long, it no longer felt like a role. It simply felt like breathing. Her father, Richard Whitmore, raised a toast somewhere between the soup and the entree. He talked about legacy, about the Whitmore name, about how proud he was of his daughter, and he was looking at Victoria when he said it. Elena raised her glass. She drank. She set it down. The woman seated beside her, an aunt she saw twice a year, leaned over and said quietly, "Doesn't it bother you just a little?" Elena turned. "Doesn't what bother me?" The woman glanced toward Victoria and then back. Being the one they never see. Elena held her gaze for a moment. Then she smiled a real smile, not Victoria's kind, and said, "You get used to it." But even as she said it, something tightened in her chest, something old and familiar and sharp. It happened during dessert. Adrian Volkov set down his fork. He was seated to Victoria's left, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and the whole evening had been building toward this moment. Elena's mother had practically vibrated with anticipation throughout the meal. Her father had already rehearsed his reaction. She could tell by the way he kept almost smiling, saving it. Victoria was saying something about Paris, a trip she was planning, hotels she'd researched, and her voice was animated, her hands moving, and everything about her was performing the role of woman about to be chosen. Then Adrian reached into his jacket pocket. Elena's mother made a small sound. Her father's almost smile crept wider. The ring box was black velvet, small, elegant. Adrian set it on the table. The table went completely silent. And then Adrian Volkov looked directly down the length of that table, past the centerpieces and the candles, and the 62 guests, past Victoria, past everything, and he looked at Elena. She didn't understand it at first. She actually looked behind her, turned slightly in her chair as if maybe there was someone standing there, someone worth looking at, someone he might actually mean to acknowledge. There was no one behind her. When she turned back, he was still watching her. His expression was unreadable. Not cold, just still. The way deep water is still, and his eyes, dark and steady, did not waver. Victoria followed his gaze. The smile on her face shifted, not disappeared, just changed shape like something cracking under pressure that hadn't broken yet. Elena's mother looked too, and for one extraordinary, unguarded moment, her face showed something Elena had never seen on it before. Confusion. "I owe this table an honest moment," Adrian said. His voice was calm, not raised, not dramatic. He simply spoke and the room listened, because that was the kind of man he was. "I've given this arrangement considerable thought," he continued. "I respect the Whitmore family. I respect Richard's business, and I respect the intention behind this evening." He paused. His eyes moved briefly to Victoria, and something passed across his face, not cruelty, not contempt, but a kind of careful honesty. "But I won't be moving forward with the arrangement as it was proposed." Victoria's expression didn't collapse. She was too well trained for that, but her hands resting on the table pressed flat. Her knuckles went pale. "Adrian," her mother started. "I'd like to speak with Elena," he said, "privately, if she's willing." Every head at the table turned toward the far end, toward the chair by the kitchen, toward the woman they had spent all evening not looking at, toward Elena. She did not move for a full 3 seconds. Later, she would not be able to explain what those 3 seconds felt like. The closest she could come was this: it was like being in a room all your life with the lights off and then someone flipping a switch. Not warm, not comfortable, just visible. Suddenly, sharply, uncomfortably visible. "Me," she said. The word came out smaller than she intended. "Yes," Adrian said. "You." Her mother's voice came from somewhere to her left, tight and sharp. "Elena, this is not the time to—" "Mrs. Whitmore." Adrian's voice cut through cleanly, not rudely, just firmly. "I'm speaking to your daughter, the other one." The silence that followed was deafening, and then Elena Whitmore, who had spent 27 years being the background of her own life, pushed back her chair, stood up, and said, "All right." They stepped into the study just off the main hall. It was her father's room. She had been in it maybe a dozen times in her life, always briefly, always as an afterthought. It smelled like leather and old paper. There was a desk she'd never sat at and a window she'd never looked out of. Adrian closed the door behind them. He didn't sit. He stood near the center of the room, hands loose at his sides, and for a moment he just looked at her. Not the way men sometimes look at women, like they're inventorying something. More like he was confirming something. Like he'd suspected something and was checking his math. "You're wondering why Pia?" he said. "That would be a fair summary, yes," she said, his mouth curved, not quite a smile. "How long have you been watching from that chair at the end of the table?" She blinked. "Excuse me. You've been watching this family run their machinery all evening. You see everything, you say almost nothing, you've smiled 4 times, twice at the waitstaff, once at the woman beside you, and once at something you were thinking about privately." He paused. Victoria smiled 41 times. None of them reached her eyes. Elena stared at him. "You counted," she said flatly. "I noticed things," he said. "It's kept me alive." She should have left. She understood that on some rational level. She should have walked back out into that dining room, sat back down in her chair by the kitchen, and let the adults manage whatever explosion was happening out there without her. She didn't leave. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "A conversation," he said, "and then, depending on how that goes, a proposal." "You just publicly ended an engagement in front of 60 people." "I did. To my sister." "Yes. And now you want to propose to me?" He held her gaze. "Not the way you're thinking. Sit down, Elena." "I'll stand." Something shifted in his face, almost approval. "Fine." He told her the truth. That was the thing she kept coming back to later. He didn't dress it up. He didn't perform. He told her the truth the way someone reads from a contract, clearly, completely without apology. He needed a wife. Not a real one, a legal one. 12 months. A formal marriage on paper with a signed contract outlining both parties' rights, obligations, and exit terms. He would handle every financial aspect. She would have her own space, her own accounts, her own life within the arrangement. She would attend a small number of public events with him, dinners, functions, appearances that made the marriage credible. Beyond that, she owed him nothing. At the end of 12 months, they would quietly divorce. She would walk away with enough money to build whatever life she chose without her family's name, without their approval, without their control. Why, she asked when he finished. Why not Victoria? She would have said yes without the contract. Exactly, Bertrand, he said. She frowned. Your sister, he said carefully, would have treated this like a real marriage within 60 days. She would have redecorated my home, introduced herself as the decision maker in rooms I use for serious work, and by month 3, she would have been leveraging the relationship for your family's benefit in ways that would compromise me. I've watched her for 3 hours. Elena almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so precisely accurate that it stung. And you think I'm different, she said. I think you understand arrangements, he said. I think you've been living in one your entire life, one you didn't choose and didn't benefit from. I'm offering you one, you sign yourself with clear terms and a clear exit. She was quiet for a long time. From somewhere beyond the door, she could hear raised voices. Her mother's, she thought, possibly Victoria's. The sound was muffled, but the shape of it was familiar, the particular frequency of Whitmore anger, controlled and cold and relentless. My family will not forgive this, she said. No, he agreed. They won't. That doesn't bother you. Does it bother you? She looked at him, really looked at him in a way that was starting to feel dangerous because she was starting to actually see him. Not the rumors, not the reputation, not the power, but the man standing in her father's study in the middle of a mess he'd deliberately created, offering her a door out of a room she'd been locked in for years. Ask me again in 24 hours, she said. She walked back out alone. He stayed behind, which she was grateful for. She needed the distance. She needed her face to do the work of composure before she hit the hallway. Her father met her at the door to the dining room. Richard Whitmore was 61 years old and had built his life on the management of perception. He was good at it. His face right now was doing the thing it always did when he was furious, but couldn't show it a careful blankness that was somehow worse than anger. Elena, he said, quiet. What is happening? He wanted to talk, she said. We talked. About what? Business, her father's jaw tightened. Don't be clever. I'm not being clever, Dad. He had something he wanted to discuss. We discussed it, that's all. Victoria is... He stopped himself, started again. Your sister is very upset. I imagine she is. Elena, his voice dropped lower. Whatever he said to you in there, whatever he offered you, you need to think very carefully about what your answer is going to be. This is not just about you. And there it was, that sentence, that exact sentence. This is not just about you. She had been hearing it her entire life, and it had always meant the same thing, which was, you are not the important one. You are not the one who matters. Whatever you want, whatever you feel, it comes last. She looked at her father. She kept her voice steady. I know, she said, it never is. And she walked past him. She found Victoria in the powder room standing at the mirror, not fixing anything, just standing. Still, the way she stood when she was past the point of performing and hadn't yet decided on the next move. When Elena came in, Victoria's eyes found her in the reflection. Well, Victoria said, her voice was silk over stone. What did he say? He apologized for the confusion, Elena said, which was technically true if you counted a single brief acknowledgement of the evening's awkwardness as an apology. Victoria turned slowly. Don't do that. Don't manage me. I'm not. He chose you. Victoria said it without raising her voice. That was the frightening thing. He looked down that table past me and he chose you. And I want to know why. Elena held her sister's gaze. I don't know, she said. Liar, Victoria said softly. And for the first time in as long as Elena could remember, maybe the first time in her life, she did not apologize. She just looked at her sister in the silence of that small room and she said nothing. And somehow that nothing was the loudest thing she had ever done. She drove home alone that night. The dinner had dissolved well before the scheduled end. Her mother had made excuses to the guests. Her father had disappeared into his study, the one she'd just been standing in, the one that suddenly felt different to her smaller, and Victoria had left without saying goodbye. Elena sat in her car in the driveway of her apartment building for a long time. She thought about the contract, the 12 months, the exit. She thought about what he'd said. You've been living in an arrangement your entire life, one you didn't choose and didn't benefit from. She thought about her mother's face when Adrian had said the other one. She thought about her father's voice, this is not just about you. She thought about Victoria's liar. She thought about herself, 27 years old, seated at the far end of a table by the kitchen, raising her glass when everyone else raised theirs, smiling at the right moments, disappearing into the background so seamlessly that sometimes she wondered if she had a self at all, or just a very good impression of one. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. 3 words. Take your time. She stared at the screen. Then she looked out the windshield at the dark street, at the ordinary world going quietly about its night, completely unaware that something had shifted. Something small and private and enormous. She typed back a single word. Tomorrow. And then she went inside. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed at 2 a.m. with the contract Adrian had emailed her. There it was, 12 pages, precise language, clear terms, exactly as he'd described. Open on her laptop, reading it for the 4th time. It was real. It was real, and it was specific, and it was more honest than anything her family had ever put in front of her. Her phone buzzed again. Her mother this time. She let it ring, then Victoria, then her father. She let them all ring. She read the contract a 5th time, and on the 5th time she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a clause near the end in the same clean, precise language as everything else. It said simply, either party may exit the arrangement with 60 days notice and full financial settlement, no conditions, no contest, no exceptions, no conditions, no contest, no exceptions. She closed her eyes. In 27 years, nobody had ever offered her no conditions. She opened them again. She reached for her pen. She didn't sign it that night, but she didn't delete it either. And somewhere in the space between those two things, between the signing and the deleting, was the first real decision Elena Whitmore had ever made entirely for herself. She set the pen down on the nightstand. She closed the laptop. She lay back on the pillow. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't fall asleep thinking about her family. She fell asleep thinking about herself. She signed it the next morning. Not impulsively, not dramatically. She woke up at 6:15, made herself coffee, sat at her kitchen table in the gray morning light, read the contract one final time, from the first line to the last, and then she signed her name at the bottom of page 12. Steady hand, clear head, no hesitation she allowed herself to feel. She photographed it, sent it to the number that had texted her the night before, and then she set her phone face down on the table and finished her coffee. Her phone lit up within 4 minutes. Not a call, just a text. Thank you. My attorney will reach out by noon. I'll send a car at 7 this evening if you are ready to move forward. She turned the phone over again, stared at the ceiling. She had 12 hours. She spent the first 2 of them doing something she had not expected, nothing. She sat in the chair by her window and let the reality of what she'd done settle into her body, the way cold water settles slowly, completely, without mercy. She was married, or she would be within the week, according to the contract's timeline. Legally married to a man she had spoken to for 40 minutes in her father's study. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. Her mother called at 8:17. Elena watched the screen, counted 4 rings, and let it go to voicemail. 20 seconds later, a text Elena. Call me immediately. This is serious. Everything was always serious with Diane Whitmore. The word had lost its meaning years ago. Victoria texted at 8:45. One sentence, I hope you know what you're doing. She didn't. But she was starting to think that maybe not knowing for once was the point. Her father called at 9. She picked up on the 3rd ring because Richard Whitmore called once and then stopped, and something in her wasn't ready to have that particular silence between them yet. Elena. His voice was controlled, too controlled, the way it got when he was building towards something. I need you to come to the house. I can't today, Dad. This isn't optional. I know you feel that way. A pause, short, precise. What does that mean? It means I hear you, she said carefully, and I still can't come today. Another pause longer this time. She could feel him recalibrating. Richard Whitmore was not a man who expected refusal from Elena. Victoria, yes, Victoria pushed back openly, loudly in ways that started arguments and eventually resolved into his favor. But Elena had always folded quietly. It was she understood, now the thing he was counting on. Did you sign something, he asked. She didn't answer. Elena, his voice dropped to its coldest register. Did you sign something with that man? I'll call you later, Dad. She hung up. Her hands were still stowed. She looked at them for a moment, almost expecting something, a tremor, some physical betrayal of the magnitude of what she was doing. Nothing. Just her hands. Just her. She started packing. She didn't pack everything. She didn't have a lot to begin with. Her apartment had always been functional rather than personal because personalization cost money, and money had always been a negotiation in this family. She packed 2 bags, one with clothes, one with the small collection of things that were genuinely hers. A few books, a sketchbook she'd kept since college, a photograph of herself at 12 sitting in a tree in their backyard before she'd learned to make herself small. Before she'd learned that small was what they wanted. She was zipping the second bag when someone knocked on her door. She knew before she opened it. Victoria was standing in the hallway in a coat that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, and her face, that perfectly arranged face, was doing something Elena had rarely seen it do. It was unguarded, not angry, not performing, just raw in a way that made Elena's chest tighten against her will. You answered for Dad, Victoria said. You didn't answer for me. You didn't call, you texted. Because I didn't know what to say out loud. Victoria looked past her into the apartment, saw the bags, looked back at Elena. Something moved across her face, fast, involuntary, real. You're actually doing it. Yes. Elena, she stopped, started again differently. Do you understand who he is? I understand who he is. Do you? Because I spent 6 weeks learning everything about Adrian Volkov before that dinner, and what I learned. She lowered her voice, even though the hallway was empty. He is not safe. Whatever he offered you, whatever it looks like on paper, he is not a safe man. Elena looked at her sister, really looked at her, at the fear underneath the control, at the something genuine that was fighting its way through all that polish. And she felt it, the pull of it, the old reflex to soften, to reassure, to shrink back to the size that kept the peace. She didn't. Were you safe, Victoria, with him? Would this arrangement have been safe for you? Victoria blinked. That's different. Why? Because it was your choice to make and not mine. She stopped. Because you were the one they picked, Elena said quietly, not cruelly, just clearly. And I'm the one who picked herself. That's the only difference. Victoria stared at her. For one extraordinary second, Elena thought her sister might cry. The line of her jaw went tight and her eyes, God, her eyes showed something deeply human underneath all that careful surface. And Elena waited, held herself still, because whatever came next, she needed to hear it without flinching. But Victoria didn't cry. She pulled herself back together the way she always did, with a speed that was both impressive and heartbreaking. When it goes wrong, Victoria said finally, and it will go wrong, don't call Mom and Dad. I know. Call me. Elena went still. Call me, Victoria said again, softer. Whatever you think of me, whatever's happening between us right now, call me. Elena swallowed something. Okay. Victoria nodded once, then she turned and walked back down the hallway. Without another word, her heels quiet on the carpet, her coat perfect, her spine straight, and Elena stood in the doorway and watched her go, and felt something complicated and true move through her chest. She closed the door. She finished packing. The car came at 7, exactly as promised. It was not the kind of car that announced itself. No driver in a uniform, no limousine. Just a dark, clean car with a driver who opened her door without speaking and closed it behind her with a quiet, definitive click. Elena sat in the back with her 2 bags at her feet and watched the city move past the window and told herself firmly that she was not afraid. She was, a little, but it was a different kind of fear than she was used to. It wasn't the fear of disapproval or the fear of making the wrong move in someone else's game. It was the fear of open space, the fear of a door you'd never walked through before. That kind she decided she could survive. Adrian's home was not what she had imagined, though she couldn't have articulated exactly what she had imagined. It was substantial without being theatrical. Real space, real quiet. The driver brought her bags to a room that was already prepared, not decorated for her, not with any presumption of taste, but clean and spacious and genuinely hers in a way her apartment had never quite managed to feel. She stood in the middle of it and breathed. Adrian knocked. He didn't walk in. He knocked and then waited for her to open the door, which struck her as a detail worth noticing in a man who could have simply entered anything he owned. "The kitchen is yours whenever you want it," he said. "My staff keeps their own schedule. I'll introduce you to them tomorrow, if that works for you." "That works. The lawyers are finishing the municipal paperwork. We'll go in Thursday to make it official." A pause. "Unless you've changed your mind." She met his eyes. "Have you, no." "Then Thursday is fine." He nodded, started to turn. "Adrian." She surprised herself with it, the use of his name, the fact that she stopped him. He turned back. "Why did you really end it with Victoria, not the version you told me? The full version?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was thinking, not avoiding. "Your sister would have been an exceptional wife," he said finally. "Organized, strategic. She understands optics. She would have played the role perfectly." "Then why?" "Because I've spent 15 years surrounded by people who play roles perfectly," he said, "and I am very tired of it." She held his gaze. "I don't know you," she said, "and you don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I watched you for 3 hours survive something that would have made a different person invisible, and you kept your dignity without performing a single moment of it. That's not nothing." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said the truest thing she had. "I don't know how to do this." "Nobody does," he said. "That's not a failing." He left. The door clicked shut behind him. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her knees and stared at the floor and thought, "I'm married, or almost. In 3 days, I will be legally, contractually, technically married to that man in the hallway. And my mother doesn't know which room I'm sleeping in. And Victoria told me to call her. And my father is probably on his second scotch right now in a study I was never supposed to matter in, and none of them, not one, is in this room with me. Just her. Just her and the quiet and the open space." She laid back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, and for the second night in a row, she didn't sleep thinking about her family. But this time, she wasn't thinking about herself either. She was thinking about what he'd said. "I've spent 15 years surrounded by people who play roles perfectly, and I am very tired of it." Something about it snagged in her and wouldn't let go. Not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. And in her experience, honesty from powerful people, real honesty, the kind that cost something, was rare enough to be almost suspicious. She filed it away and closed her eyes and slept. Thursday came faster than she expected. The courthouse was quiet in the mid-morning, a Tuesday-level crowd on a Thursday, people moving through with their paperwork and their licenses and their small bureaucratic necessities. Nobody looked at them. Nobody recognized Adrian. Nobody looked twice at Elena. She signed her name on a new document. Adrian signed his. The official witness said something standard and unremarkable. There was no ceremony, no flowers, no someone crying in the third row. It was done in 11 minutes. They walked out into the morning air, side by side, not touching, and Elena felt the strangeness of it settle over her like something both heavier and lighter than she'd anticipated. "Hungry," Adrian said. She looked at him. "What?" "It's almost 10. I haven't had breakfast." She blinked. "You're asking your new legal wife if she wants breakfast." "I'm asking the person standing next to me," he said simply, "who happens to be my new legal wife." She almost laughed. It came up unexpectedly from somewhere real, and she pressed it back down out of reflex and then stopped herself. Let it out. Just a small sound, but real. "Yes," she said, "I could eat." They found a place 2 blocks away. Not glamorous, just a diner with good coffee and a menu that hadn't been redesigned for aesthetics. They sat across from each other in a booth and ordered without ceremony, and for the first several minutes they said almost nothing. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and something in his face shifted, not alarm, but something adjacent to it, a sharpening. "I need to take this," he said. "I'll be a minute." He stepped outside. Through the window, she could see him standing on the sidewalk, one hand in his coat pocket, talking with the phone pressed to his ear. His expression was still that same deep water stillness she'd noticed at the dinner, but something in his posture had changed. A tension in the shoulders, a careful set to the jaw. She watched him without intending to. He came back in 4 minutes, sat down, picked up his coffee, didn't offer an explanation. "Everything okay?" she asked. He looked at her, measured. "A complication. Related to me, related to my business," he said. Then after a pause, "possibly related to your family." She set her cup down. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that your father made a call this morning to someone he should not have called, and that call may require me to respond in a way that changes our timeline slightly." She felt the cold move through her before she could stop it. "What did he do?" "He reached out to a man named Castellan," Adrian said, watching her face. "Do you know that name?" She did not. "Marcus Castellan is someone who has been trying to undermine my business interests for approximately 3 years," Adrian said, keeping his voice level, measured a man briefing someone on facts. "Your father, it seems, is under the impression that Castellan's resources might help him help your family pressure me into reversing the arrangement." The coldness spread. "My father," she said slowly, "called your enemy, to use against you." "Against us," Adrian corrected quietly. "The arrangement is legal now. Whatever comes at me comes at you too, Elena. That's part of what you signed." She stared at him. "Did you know he might do this?" He held her gaze for one moment, one single honest moment, and then he said, "I thought it was possible, and you didn't warn me." "I warned you he wouldn't forgive it," he said. "I didn't know the precise shape it would take." She sat with that, sat with the anger of it, the cold, precise anger, and underneath that, something worse, the grief of it. Her father, on the morning of her wedding, had called a dangerous man to try to dismantle the first real decision she had ever made. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Adrian said, "we eat breakfast, and then I handle it." "And me?" He looked at her with something she couldn't name yet, not pity, not protection, something more complicated than either. He said, "Shidaye, learn what it means to be in my world. Starting with this, when something happens, we don't panic. We think, and then we move." She breathed in, breathed out. "All right," she said. He nodded, picked up his fork, and for the next 20 minutes they ate breakfast in the quiet of that ordinary diner on an ordinary street in a city that had no idea that the most complicated 12 months of Elena Whitmore's life had just officially begun. She didn't know yet what her father had set in motion. She didn't know what Castellan's name would come to mean to her. She didn't know what living inside Adrian Volkov's world would require of her in ways the contract hadn't covered and couldn't have predicted. But she was there, present, awake, and for the first time in 27 years, she was nobody's afterthought. The name Castellan came up again 4 days later, and this time it wasn't Adrian who said it. It was Elena's mother. Diane Whitmore called on a Sunday evening, which was strategic. Sunday evenings had always been family time in the Whitmore household, and her mother had a gift for weaponizing nostalgia. Elena almost didn't pick up. She stood in the kitchen of Adrian's home with her phone buzzing against the counter and counted her own heartbeats the way you count seconds between lightning and thunder, measuring distance, measuring danger. She picked up on the 6th ring. "You look thin in the photo," her mother said without preamble. Elena went still. "What photo?" "The one someone took outside the courthouse, Thursday morning." A pause, precise and deliberate. "You were smiling, Elena." I didn't recognize the expression at first. There was something so perfectly devastating in that sentence. I didn't recognize the expression that Elena had to set her free hand flat on the counter to steady herself. Not from grief, from the particular exhaustion of being known so completely and seen so poorly. "How are you, Mom?" she said evenly. "How am I?" Her mother's voice shifted registers, moving from silk into something harder underneath. "Your father hasn't slept in 4 days. Your sister is fielding questions from people in our circle who don't understand what happened at that dinner. And you are legally married to a man none of us know, living in his house, and you want to ask me how I am." "Yes," Elena said, "I do." Silence. Short, sharp. "Marcus Castellan called your father," Diane said. Elena's hand pressed harder against the counter. "I know." Another silence, this one different. Surprised. "You know," her mother repeated. "Yes." "Then you know what he told him." It wasn't a question, it was a test. Her mother was always testing, measuring how much Elena knew, how much leverage that left. I know enough, Elena said, keeping her voice neutral. And Mom, whatever Dad is planning, I need you to hear me clearly. Don't. Whatever Castellan offered, whatever arrangement Dad thinks he's walking into, tell him to stop. You're warning us. Her mother's voice had gone very quiet. You're in that man's house for 4 days and you're warning your own family. I'm protecting my own family, Elena said. There's a difference. Is there? Not a question. An accusation wrapped in 2 words. Goodbye, Mom. She hung up before her mother could. First time in her life. Her hand was shaking slightly, finally. Finally, the tremor she'd been waiting for, and she pressed it flat until it stopped. She went to find Adrian. He was in his office, which she had learned was less a workspace and more a thinking space, a room he occupied when something required his full, uninterrupted attention. She knocked. He said, "Come in," without looking up, and she opened the door and stood in the frame and said, "Castellan contacted my father again. My mother just told me." He looked up then, set down his pen. What did she say exactly? She repeated it word for word because she'd already learned that Adrian didn't want summaries, he wanted precision. He listened without interrupting, his face doing that still water thing, and when she finished, he was quiet for 7, 8, 9 seconds. "Your father is going to a meeting," he said. "Tomorrow. He doesn't know I know." "How do you know?" "Because Castellan wants me to know," he said. "He's not trying to ambush me. He's trying to rattle me, make me reactive." He looked at her steadily. "Which means he doesn't know you very well yet." She frowned. "He doesn't know me at all." "He will. When he realizes you are not a liability, that you are actually calm, that you think before you speak, that you don't break under pressure." He paused. "He'll change his approach, and when he does, it'll get more personal." She absorbed that, let it sit. "You're telling me it's going to get worse." "I'm telling you it's going to get more targeted," he said, "which is different. Worse is vague. Targeted means I can prepare for it. And me, how do I prepare for it?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "There's an event Friday night. Dinner at the Hargrove Foundation. It's attended by about 40 people who matter in this city business, legal, some political. I've been going alone for 3 years. You want me there. I want you there because the best thing you can do right now is be visible, calm, present, invisible. Let people see you in that room and understand that you are not a woman who was coerced or confused or manipulated. Let them see that you are—" He paused and something shifted in his face, careful and almost careful not to be noticed. "Exactly who you are." She held his gaze. "You know, for a man running a contract marriage, you're surprisingly invested in my dignity." Something moved across his mouth, not quite a smile. "Your dignity protects us both," he said. "Don't underestimate it." But she filed that away, that not quite smile, and thought about it longer than she intended to. The Hargrove Foundation dinner was not the kind of event Elena had grown up attending. She'd attended events her family had a social life that required regular performance. But those events had always been about the Whitmore name, about her parents' positioning, about Victoria's visibility. Elena had been present the way furniture is present. Functional background, unremarked upon. Friday night was different. She knew it the moment they walked in because people looked at Adrian the way they always did, that instinctive cautious turning, and then they looked at her. Really looked, not through her, not past her, at her, with curiosity, with appraisal, with the particular sharpness of people trying to understand something they hadn't anticipated. She kept her spine straight, her expression open without being eager. She'd learned that much from 27 years of watching Victoria, the performance of ease, even when ease was the last thing you felt. The first person who approached them was a woman named Irene Halston, 60, maybe 65, sharp eyes behind elegant frames. She ran the foundation, and she had the particular energy of someone who had spent decades being underestimated and had long since stopped accommodating it. "Adrian," she said warmly, kissing his cheek. Then she turned to Elena, and her gaze was not unkind but honest, assessing. "And you must be Elena Whitmore." "Elena Volkov," Adrian said quietly beside her. She heard it. The name. Her name now, technically by the terms of the contract. She'd checked that clause. She had not heard it spoken aloud before. Something moved through her, complex and strange. "Elena," Irene said, and her tone shifted slightly, something warming in it. "I hear you're new to all of this." "To what specifically?" Elena said. Irene smiled. "A real one. to being seen. Elena blinked. Irene had already moved on, turning back to Adrian, asking something about the Foundation's shipping partnership, and Elena was left standing with that sentence hanging in the air around her. To being seen. She recovered quickly. That was another thing she was learning about herself. She recovered quickly. She'd always thought of herself as slow to act, slow to decide, slow to trust. But what she was discovering was that she was actually deliberate. Deliberate was not slow. Deliberate was choosing every step on purpose. The evening moved. She talked to people. Actually talked, not performed. A city council member who wanted to know her background. A logistics CEO who asked about her connection to Adrian's shipping interests and seemed genuinely surprised when she answered knowledgeably because she'd spent the week reading everything about those interests that Adrian's files made accessible. A philanthropist who recognized her father's name and let something careful cross her face before saying, "You must be very different from him." "I'm working on it," Elena said. The woman laughed, delighted, and introduced her to two other people. Adrian across the room caught her eye once, just once. And he gave her the smallest nod, not approval exactly, but something that registered and was real. She was halfway through a conversation about urban development policy when her phone buzzed. She excused herself, stepped back, slightly looked at the screen. Victoria. A text. "Dad is at the meeting with Castellan right now. I thought you should know." Elena typed back. "How do you know?" "Because I followed him." She stared at the screen. "Don't do anything," Elena typed. "Stay outside, don't go in." "Victoria, do you hear me?" 3 dots. "Then I'm already inside." Elena's blood went cold. She walked directly to Adrian. He read her face before she said a word. She was starting to learn that about him, the way his attention sharpened the moment hers did, like a frequency they were already learning to share. "Victoria is at the meeting," she said, keeping her voice low. "She followed my father." Adrian's stillness became a different quality of still, the kind that preceded movement. "Who else is at that meeting?" "I don't know." He had his phone out in one smooth motion, stepping away from the group he'd been speaking with, already dialing. Elena stood and breathed and told herself firmly, "Don't panic, think, then move," his words. She held him like a rope. He came back in under 2 minutes. His face told her nothing, which she was learning meant more than she could yet read. "We're leaving," he said. They were in the car within 4 minutes. He was on the phone again before the door closed, speaking in a low-clipped voice to someone she didn't know in language that was technical and careful and told her the contours of things without the details. She sat beside him and kept her hands quiet in her lap and looked out at the city moving past the window and thought about Victoria. Victoria who had told her, "Call me." Victoria who had shown up at her apartment in that expensive coat with her unguarded face. Victoria who was apparently now sitting inside a room with their father and a dangerous man because what? Loyalty to the family, trying to fix something, trying to protect something, trying to protect her. The thought arrived unexpected and hit harder than she anticipated. "Adrian," she said. He held up one finger one moment, finished his call, put the phone down. "Is she safe?" Elena asked. "Victoria, is she safe right now?" He looked at her. "Yes, Castellan won't touch her in a meeting with her father. Too public, too messy. His interest is in leverage, not confrontation. But she's giving him leverage by being there." "Yes," he said, "she is." She pressed her fingers together. "We have to get her out." "We will." "How?" "The same way you handle every problem that involves someone else's choices," he said. "Carefully, without force, and with the understanding that she walked in on her own, which means she has to walk out on her own terms, or she won't respect the exit." She turned to look at him in the dark of the car. "That's actually very precise." "I know your sister better than she'd like," he said. "I spent 6 weeks assessing the Whitmore family before that dinner. That landed differently than it might have a week ago. Before the contract, before the courthouse, before breakfast, and the name spoken aloud in Irene Halston's eyes, it might have felt invasive. Now it felt like the truth about how careful he actually was. "What did you see?" she asked. "About me, when you were assessing us." A pause, longer than his usual pauses. "I saw someone who had made a life out of not needing things," he said, "who had gotten very good at surviving on what was left over after everyone else took what they needed. Who was—" He stopped, reconsidered his word. "Quietly extraordinary. In a way her family had weaponized into invisibility. The car was quiet. That's a very specific thing to notice about a stranger. She said, her voice not quite even. I told you I noticed things. You notice things about everyone. Another pause. Not like that, he said. And then with the precision of a man who says exactly what he means and nothing more. Not like that. She didn't respond. She looked out the window. The city moved past. The meeting ended before they arrived, which was both a relief and its own kind of problem. Victoria was outside when they pulled up, standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing her composure the way people wear wet clothes, technically covered, completely transparent. She looked at Elena when they got out of the car. Not at Adrian, at Elena. He made them an offer, Victoria said. Dad and Castellan, together. They're offering to publicly dispute the marriage claim you were under duress, that the contract was coerced in exchange for Castellan dropping whatever he's currently holding over the Whitmore portfolio. Elena heard every word, organized them, felt the shape of what they meant. They were going to say she hadn't chosen this freely. They were going to use her own voice, the voice she'd been denied for 27 years, as a weapon against the first decision she'd ever made with it. She felt Adrian go still beside her. Elena, Victoria's voice cracked slightly, just at the edge. I went in there to stop it. I want you to know that. I went in there to try to stop it. Did you? Elena said. I tried. She exhaled. Dad wouldn't listen. He never does. No, Victoria said softly. He never does. The three of them stood on that sidewalk in the night air, and something settled between Elena and her sister. Not resolution, not forgiveness, not anything that clean. Just a shared, honest recognition of what their family was, what it had always been. The kind of recognition that feels like grief and also strangely like relief. Adrian spoke then, and his voice was calm and final. They can file whatever claim they want. The contract is documented, witnessed, and filed with 2 separate attorneys. Elena's signature was given freely and is time-stamped from her own device, from her own apartment, 6 hours after the dinner. There is no duress argument that holds. Victoria looked at him. You prepared for this. I prepare for everything, he said simply. Victoria looked back at Elena, and in her face, beneath all of it, beneath the fear and the complicated loyalty and the evening's damage, there was something that looked almost like wonder. You're okay, Victoria said. Not a question this time. I'm okay, Elena said. It was true. That was the thing that astonished her. It was completely straightforwardly true. She was standing in the middle of what should have been a crisis. Her father in a room with a dangerous man. Her family building a case against her choice, the most consequential relationship of her life, under legal threat, and she was okay. Present, thinking, steady. She didn't know when she'd become this person. She wasn't sure she'd been this person before Simo, but she was her now, standing on this sidewalk, and she wasn't moving. Go home, Victoria, she said gently. Don't go back to Mom and Dad's tonight. Go to your own place. Victoria hesitated. Call me tomorrow, Elena said. We'll talk then. Something in Victoria loosened visibly, physically loosened, like a held breath finally released. She nodded. She turned and walked toward her own car. Elena watched her go and then turned back to find Adrian watching her. She came there to protect you, he said. I know. That changes things. I know, she said again, but it doesn't change what my father did. No, he agreed, it doesn't. They got back into the car. The city was quieter now, later into the evening, the specific quiet of a place that had exhaled its urgency and gone to rest. And Elena sat in the passenger seat and understood with a clarity that felt new and permanent, that whatever came next, she was no longer navigating it as someone's forgotten daughter, someone's overlooked sister, someone's background character. She was navigating it as herself, and herself, she was discovering, was someone worth reckoning with. Her father filed the dispute on a Monday. Elena found out the way she found out most things now, not from her family but from Adrian, who set a single printed document on the kitchen counter at 7 a.m. without ceremony, without preamble, the way someone places a fact in front of you and lets you decide what to do with it. She read it standing up, didn't sit, didn't need to. The language was legal and careful, but the meaning was simple. Richard Whitmore was formally contesting the validity of his daughter's marriage on grounds of emotional vulnerability and undue influence. He was claiming Elena had been in a state of psychological distress at the time of signing, that she had been, in the language of the document, susceptible to manipulation by a party in a position of social and financial dominance. She read it twice, set it down. "He's saying I didn't know what I was doing," she said. "Yes," Adrian said. "He's saying I'm not capable of making my own decisions. That is what the document argues." She looked up. Her voice was completely level. "That is the most honest thing my father has ever accidentally said about how he sees me." Adrian studied her face. "You're not falling apart. Should I be? Most people would." "People? Most people haven't had 27 years of practice." She picked up the document, again scanned the signature at the bottom. Her father's handwriting. She knew it well. She'd seen it on birthday cards that were really instructions, on school reports he'd annotated with corrections on checks written to Victoria's endeavors and withheld from hers. "What do we do?" "Our attorney responds today," Adrian said. "The documentation is airtight. The timestamp on your digital signature is tied to your personal device in your home network. It proves you were alone in your own apartment hours after the dinner. No one was with you. No pressure applied." He paused. "The filing will be dismissed. It's not a real legal threat. It's a message." "What message?" "That he won't stop. That he's willing to publicly humiliate you to regain control." He held her gaze. "He's betting you'll fold. Come home. Agree to have the marriage quietly annulled to protect the family name." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He doesn't know me at all, does he?" Something in Adrian's expression shifted, subtle but real. "No," he said, "he doesn't." She handed the document back. "Then let's respond." The attorney's reply went out by 10. By noon, the story had reached 3 people in their social circle, because legal filings in small, powerful worlds travel fast, and Richard Whitmore had not been as discreet as he'd intended. By 2 in the afternoon, Elena's phone was full of messages she didn't want and one she did. "Victoria, I didn't know he was filing. I want you to know that." Elena believed her. That surprised her. A week ago, she might not have. But something had shifted between them on that sidewalk outside Castellan's meeting, something that couldn't be unshifted. She called Victoria back. Victoria answered on the first ring. "He's going to keep going," Victoria said before Elena could speak. "I know him. This isn't the last move. The filing is it's just the opening. He's testing how much you'll absorb before you break. Then he's going to be testing for a long time," Elena said. A short silence. "You're really not scared." "I didn't say that." "You sound," Victoria paused. "You sound different, Elena. You sound like someone who takes up space." Elena opened her mouth, closed it, took a breath. "I'm learning," she said. "It turns out it's a skill, like anything else." Victoria was quiet for a moment that felt like it held something important. Then she said, "What can I do?" "Nothing right now. Just don't let them use you. Don't let Dad put you in the middle of this again." "He already has." "I know, but you can choose to step out of it." Elena paused. "You walked into that meeting to protect me. That matters to me, Victoria. It does. But I don't need you to fight my battles. I just need you not to become a weapon in his." Victoria exhaled, a long, slow release of breath that carried more weight than most sentences. "Okay," she said, "okay." The lawsuit was dismissed 6 days later, exactly as Adrian had predicted. Elena learned about it from their attorney in a brief professional email. She read it, forwarded it to Adrian with a single line done, and went back to what she'd been doing, which was sitting in the study off the main hall, reading through the briefing documents on Adrian's Hargrove Foundation partnership that Irene Halston had sent over. Because something had happened at that foundation dinner. Something beyond the evening's crisis, beyond Victoria's call, beyond all of it. Irene Halston had followed up the next morning with a message to Adrian, copied to Elena, asking if Elena would be interested in joining the Foundation's advisory committee for their new urban literacy initiative. She had not mentioned it to Adrian first. She had replied directly to Irene, yes. Adrian had seen the thread and said nothing about it, just watched her at breakfast with that expression. She was still learning to read the one that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. She was 3 pages into the briefing when he appeared in the doorway. "Castellan called me," he said. She looked up. "Anne, he wants a meeting, the 2 of us, no lawyers." She set the papers down. "Why, because the lawsuit failed and your father's usefulness to him dropped significantly. Castellan is a pragmatist. When a lever doesn't work, he looks for the next one. He leaned against the door frame watching her. He wants to reassess what I have and what I might be willing to trade. He thinks I'm negotiable, she said flatly. He thinks everything is negotiable. Are you going to meet with him? I'm considering it. A pause. I'd like to know what you think. The question landed simply without fanfare, but it hit Elena somewhere unexpected in a place that had been braced for so long, it had forgotten what it felt like to be consulted. To have someone turn to her and say, "What do you think?" Not, "This is what will happen." Not, "Let me handle it." "What do you think?" "I think," she said carefully, "that if you go to that meeting without a very specific idea of what he's actually after, not what he says he wants, but what he actually wants, you're walking in blind." Adrian nodded slowly. "Go on." "Castellan doesn't care about our marriage. He cares about whatever my father promised him in exchange for help, and now that the help didn't work, he wants his return on investment through a different channel." She paused. "What did my father promise him?" Adrian was quiet. "Adrian," she held his gaze. "What did my father promise him?" "Access," he said. "Specifically access to 3 shipping contracts I hold through the Port Authority that Castellan's company has been blocked from bidding on for 18 months. Lena processed that. "And Dad thought that by destabilizing our marriage, he could force you to give those contracts up. Force me to negotiate from a weakened position," he corrected. "With a wife who'd been publicly revealed as a liability potential legal exposure around the contract, and the Whitmore family making noise, the idea was to make the contracts seem like an easy trade for peace." "That's not a bad strategy," she said. "It's not," he agreed. "It would have worked on a different man." She sat with that for a moment. Then something clicked sharp and clear, the way things click when you've been looking at a picture from the wrong angle and then suddenly see the whole shape of it. "He's going to come at me directly," she said, "at the meeting. He's going to try to make me the offer, not you." Adrian went very still. "Think about it," she said. "You're not movable through pressure. He's already figured that out. But me, a woman who's new to this, who just had her own father file a legal claim against her, who might be feeling isolated or overwhelmed, he's going to sit across from me and offer me something. An exit. Money. Protection from whatever he's holding over my father's business. He's going to make me feel like I have a way out that doesn't go through you." The silence in the room was the loudest thing she'd heard in days. "And the reason I know this," she said quieter now, "is because my father told him exactly how to play me. He told him I was the weak one, the one who could be moved." Adrian crossed the room in 4 steps and sat down across from her. His eyes were very focused. "If that's true, it's true. Then the meeting isn't with me," he said. "It's with you." "Yes. Elena, he is not a safe man to sit across from alone." "I won't be alone. You'll be there," she paused. "But you can't be the one he's talking to. You have to let him come to me." Something moved across Adrian's face, complicated and fast, a sequence of expressions she was only beginning to have the vocabulary for. Concern, calculation, and underneath both of those, something that looked uncomfortably close to the specific fear you feel not for yourself but for someone else. "You've been in my world for 3 weeks," he said. "I know. This isn't a foundation dinner. I know that too." She met his eyes. "But it's my family that handed him the ammunition. My family that made me the target. That means I'm already in it, whether I sit in the room or not. And I would rather sit in the room with my eyes open than be maneuvered from a distance with my eyes closed." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You are significantly more dangerous than anyone in your family gave you credit for." "Yes," she said, "I am, and it's time someone outside this house understood that." The meeting with Castellan was set for Thursday. Not the same Thursday as the courthouse, a different one, further into this new life she was building, but carrying its own particular weight. She prepared. That was who she was learning, she prepared. She read everything Adrian's files held on Marcus Castellan. She talked to Irene Halston obliquely about the kind of men who built leverage-based businesses. She sat with Adrian for 2 hours the night before, not rehearsing exactly, but mapping. Here is what he might say. Here is what it means. Here is the thing beneath the thing. "He'll open with flattery," Adrian said. "He's very good at it. He'll tell you you're remarkable, that you're wasted in this arrangement. Is that what he'll think or what he'll say? Both, actually. He's not wrong, you are remarkable. He'll use true things. That's what makes him dangerous. And then he'll make you an offer that sounds like freedom. An exit from the contract with a financial settlement framed as him doing you a favor, protecting you from me. Adrian's voice was measured, but she caught the edge in it, the specific controlled edge of a man being careful about his own feelings. He'll imply things about who I am, what I do, try to make you doubt the arrangement. Will he be wrong? She asked. A pause. About what specifically? About who you are. She held his gaze. You've been careful with me. You've been honest. You've given me room and tools and the contract that said no conditions, no contest, no exceptions. But I am sitting here 3 weeks into a marriage I chose without fully understanding this world. And I want to know, is there something I should know before I sit across from a man who's going to try to use it against me? The question hung in the air between them. Adrian was quiet for longer than he'd ever been quiet with her. Not avoidant, she could read the difference now. This was the particular silence of a man deciding how honest to be and deciding to go all the way. I have done things, he said carefully, that I cannot undo. Things that were necessary in the world I operate in, and that would be difficult to defend in a different context. I won't catalog them for you, not because I'm hiding them, but because the details aren't what matters. What matters is this. I have never used someone who trusted me. I have never weaponized someone's vulnerability, and I have never... He stopped, steadied. I have never made a promise I didn't intend to keep. She listened to every word. The contract, she said, 12 months, clean exit, no conditions. Still true. Even now, his expression changed, shifted into something rawer and more careful than she'd seen on him before. The contract is what it is, he said. What I think and what the contract says are two different conversations. Her pulse moved. She chose not to pull that thread. Not tonight. Okay, she said. Then I go into that meeting knowing what I know, which is enough. He nodded once. Get some sleep, he said and stood. He was at the door when she said Adrian. He turned. Thank you, she said, for answering. He looked at her. Something in his face did the complicated thing again. The thing she was accumulating vocabulary for, slowly, the way you learn a language by living inside it. Thank you for asking, he said. Not many people do. Thursday came. Castellan was exactly what she'd expected and nothing like she'd imagined. He was compact, well-dressed, with a face built for warmth that his eyes didn't quite confirm. He shook Adrian's hand first. Then he looked at Elena, and she watched the assessment happen in real time, the quick automatic recalibration, the update to whatever picture he'd been given of her by her father. She could almost hear him revising. Good, she thought. Revise. They sat. A neutral location, a private dining room in a hotel neither of them owned, on ground that belonged to nobody. Castellan made small talk for approximately 4 minutes, which was 3.5 minutes longer than Elena's patience for it, but she waited him out. Then he looked directly at her, and he smiled. Elena, I want to say first I have enormous respect for what you've navigated these past weeks. Your family put you in a very difficult position. That took real strength to manage. It did, she agreed pleasantly. He blinked. He'd expected deflection or gratitude. She'd given him agreement, which was somehow more destabilizing. I want to be direct with you, he said. Please, she said. I believe you were placed in this arrangement before you fully understood the implications. I'm not questioning your intelligence. His smile widened slightly. Clearly that would be a mistake, but the speed of it, the pressure of the family situation, the public nature of how it happened, I think you deserve more options than you were given. She let him talk. He went on for another 3 minutes, the offer taking shape, the money, the exit, the framing of Adrian as someone with interests that might ultimately conflict with hers. It was well constructed. She acknowledged that internally. Her father had briefed him thoroughly. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, Can I ask you something? Of course. When my father called you after the dinner, before the filing, what did he tell you about me? Castellan's expression held. Good poker face, not good enough. He expressed concern for your well-being. What exact words did he use? She said, not a question. A beat. He said you'd always been impressionable, that you responded to attention from strong personalities because you hadn't received much of it growing up. The table was very quiet. He said I was impressionable, she repeated. His concern was genuine, I believe. I'm sure it was, she said. My father has always been very genuinely certain about who I am. The problem is he's never once been right. She folded her hands on the table. Mr. Castellan, I signed a legal contract of my own free will on my own timeline from my own home. I have built in 3 weeks more of an actual life than I had in 27 years inside my family's house. I am on the advisory board of the Hargrove Foundation. I am an asset to my husband's social and professional world. And I am sitting across from you right now, without notes having anticipated this exact offer before I walked into this room. She paused. Does that sound like an impressionable woman to you? Castellan looked at her. Something had changed in his expression. The warmth recalibrated the assessment, updated again, a new and more careful attention coming into his eyes. Beside her, she felt Adrian go very still, the kind of still that was almost pride. What do you want? Castellan said. Differently now, directly now, man to man, or its equivalent. I want you to walk away from whatever my father promised you, she said. I want you to understand that the leverage you think you have doesn't exist, not legally, not personally, not through me. And I want you to understand that if you continue to pursue this, you will be pursuing it against both of us. She let that sit. My husband is very good at protecting what's his. But I am learning to be equally good at protecting what's mine. And what's mine right now is this marriage, this life, and the decision I made to choose both of them. Silence. Castellan looked from her to Adrian, back to her, and then slowly, with the specific deliberateness of a man recalibrating an entire strategy. In real time, he sat back in his chair and said, Your father was very wrong about you. Yes, Elena said simply. He was. She picked up her water glass, took a sip, set it down. And across the table, Marcus Castellan, who had walked into this room holding what he thought was the winning hand, understood with complete and quiet certainty that he had not. Castellan withdrew from the shipping contract dispute 11 days later. No announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet legal withdrawal filed through his attorney, the kind of paperwork that speaks in silence. Adrian's team confirmed it on a Tuesday morning, and when he told Elena over breakfast, she simply nodded, refilled her coffee, and said, Good. What's next? He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her more often lately. That long, careful look, the one she'd stopped trying to decode and started simply receiving. You're not going to celebrate? I'll celebrate when my father stops, she said. Castellan was a tool. The man holding the tool is still there. Adrian was quiet for a moment. 3 months ago, you would have called him your father with a different tone entirely. She considered that. 3 months ago, I was a different person entirely. He picked up his own cup, said nothing more. But the look stayed. She noticed. She always noticed now. She just hadn't decided yet what to do about it. What she did instead was work. She had discovered somewhere between the Hargrove Foundation briefings and the third Castellan crisis, and the particular freedom of choosing her own schedule for the first time in her life, that she was exceptionally good at seeing the shape of things, at walking into a room full of complicated people and understanding quickly and clearly who needed what and where the real conversation was happening underneath the performed one. Irene Halston had noticed it too. She told Elena directly over lunch in the 4th week, You have a gift for people that has absolutely nothing to do with charm. It's something rarer. You actually pay attention. The literacy initiative launched in the 6th week of the marriage. Elena had restructured the community outreach component, identified 3 partner organizations the foundation had overlooked, and written the grant summary that secured supplemental funding from a private donor Irene had been courting for 2 years. She did all of it in the hours between 8 and 2 in the study off the main hall that had become hers, without either of them formally declaring it so. Life inside Adrian's world had a rhythm she was still learning, but she was learning it the way she learned everything, completely with full attention, making no assumption she hadn't verified herself. They had dinner together most evenings. That had not been in the contract. It had happened organically the way real things do, first once, then twice, they so regularly that not doing it would have required a decision. They talked, not always about serious things, sometimes about the foundation, sometimes about the news, sometimes about nothing important and everything real. She was discovering that he was underneath the stillness and the precision and the reputation that preceded him into every room genuinely funny, dry and sparse, but funny. And that he listened the way almost no one she had ever known listened fully without waiting for his turn to speak. She was not falling in love with him. She told herself that regularly with the methodical honesty she was applying to everything in her new life. She was not falling in love. She was becoming someone in proximity to another person who made space for that becoming, and that was a different thing entirely, and she was not going to confuse the two. She almost believed it. In the 9th week, her father came to the house. She didn't know he was coming. The staff informed her that a Richard Whitmore was at the gate, and she stood in the hallway for a full 10 seconds before she said, "Let him in," and then went to find Adrian. He was already aware. Of course he was. "Do you want me there?" he asked. "No," she said. Then, "Yes, but not in the room." He understood immediately. "I'll be in the study." She walked to the front room and waited. Her father walked in looking smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed, not smaller in stature because Richard Whitmore was still tall and still carried himself with the posture of a man accustomed to being the largest presence in any space, but smaller, reduced by something. The lawsuit had cost him socially. Castellan's withdrawal had cost him strategically, and whatever was happening in the space between those losses had cost him something more personal, something that lived in the way he moved, in the set of his jaw, and the fact that he had come here himself instead of sending an attorney or a message. He sat down across from her without being invited. Old habit, she let it go. "You look well," he said. "Thank you. The house is, he looked around briefly, "larger than I expected." "Was there something you needed, Dad?" The directness landed. She watched it land, the slight tightening around his eyes, the recalibration. He'd come prepared for the old Elena, the one who would offer tea and soften her sentences and wait for him to arrive at his point at his own pace. He was meeting a different woman in the same face, and his body was still catching up with his brain. "I came to talk," he said, then talk. Another adjustment. "The filing, the legal challenge was dismissed," she said. "Yes, I know." "I want to explain." "You don't need to explain it, Dad." She kept her voice even. No anger in it. She'd processed the anger weeks ago in the car on the way back from the Castellan meeting with the city moving past the window. What was left wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but something cleaner. Clarity. You were afraid of losing control of something you'd never actually had control of. I understand why you did it. I don't agree with it, and I won't pretend it didn't happen. But I understand it. He stared at her. "You've changed," he said. "I've stopped making myself smaller so you could feel larger," she said. "It probably looks the same from the outside." His jaw worked. She recognized the expression, the one he wore when he was confronting something true that he'd rather reclassify as insubordination. "Elena, this marriage is mine," she said. "My decision, my life, made with my own name and my own handwriting on my own time." She paused. "I need you to hear me clearly, because I'm only going to say this once, and I mean every word of it. I am not coming home. I am not ending this. I am not returning to the version of myself that fit neatly into the space your family assigned me. That version is gone." She folded her hands in her lap. "What I am, what I can be is your daughter, if you want that. The real one, not the quiet one in the corner. But that's the only version that's available now." The room was completely silent. Richard Whitmore looked at his daughter, truly looked the way he almost never had, and something in his face moved. Slowly, painfully. The way something moves when it has been fixed in place for a very long time and is only now being asked to shift. He didn't speak for almost a minute. Then he said quietly, "Your mother misses you." Elena felt the pull of it, that old gravity, the specific weight of being needed by people who had never quite seen you. She held it. Didn't push it away, didn't let it move her. "Tell her she can call me," she said, "anytime, but not with conditions attached." He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who had come expecting a negotiation and found a boundary instead and was deciding slowly at cost to respect it. He stood. She walked him to the door. At the threshold, he turned back, and for one moment he looked like what he actually was, a 61-year-old man who had built a life around control and was confronting late and hard the limits of that architecture. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. I know. He stopped. I see you, he said, roughly, like the words had to be pulled. I didn't always, but I see you now. She held the door and looked at her father and felt something complicated and permanent settle into place inside her. I know that too, she said. Goodbye, Dad. He left. She stood in the hall for a blank moment after the car disappeared, not moving, letting the quiet hold her. Adrian appeared from the study doorway. He didn't ask how it went. He looked at her face and said, Dinner in 20 minutes. Yes, she said. Give me 10. She went to her room in this house that had become real in ways she hadn't predicted, and she sat on the edge of the bed and she cried. Not from grief exactly and not from relief exactly, but from the particular release of something that had been held too long, finally set down. Her father's voice. I see you. Too late and not enough, and also somehow real. She cried for 5 minutes. Then she washed her face, straightened her spine, and went to dinner. It was in the 11th week that the contract came up again. Not from her, from him. They were at the table late in the evening, and the conversation had moved through 3 topics and was settling into the comfortable quiet they'd both gotten used to when Adrian set down his glass and said, We're at the midpoint. She looked up. Of the 12 months. Yes, I know. He was looking at the table. Not at her at the table, which was unusual for a man whose primary mode of engagement was direct eye contact. The terms are clear, he said. Month 12, clean exit. Both parties. No contest. I remember the contract, she said carefully. I want to discuss a modification. Her heartbeat shifted. She kept her face still. What kind of modification? He looked up then, finally, and what was on his face was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen there, not the controlled warmth of a strategic man making a considered decision, but something that lived below all of that. Something that was costing him to show. I'd like to extend the terms, he said. She waited. Indefinitely, he said. The words sat between them. She studied his face. The open, careful face of a man who had spent 15 years surrounded by performance and had asked her to marry him specifically because she didn't perform, and who was now with his own face entirely unguarded asking for more than the contract they'd both signed. Adrian, she said, be specific. He exhaled. I don't want the year to end. That's not the same as an indefinite extension. No. A pause. I want you to stay. Not as a contract. Not as a term or a condition. I want you to stay because... He stopped, collected himself with the precision she'd always admired, and was now watching dismantle itself in real time. Because the version of myself that exists in this house with you in it is the first version in 15 years that I actually recognize. She did not speak. You don't have to answer now, he said. The contract stands regardless. If you want month 12 and a clean exit, that is exactly what you will have with everything promised. I will not... Adrian, she stopped him. He went still. I've been sitting across from you for 11 weeks. She said, I've been in the room when you're working and when you're worried and when you're thinking and when you're being honestly funny at 7 in the morning before either of us is ready to perform for the world. I have watched you be careful with me in ways that nobody in my life has ever been careful with anything. She paused, breathed. I'm not leaving in month 12. He looked at her. I'm staying, she said, not because of the contract, because I choose to, which is the only reason either of us would want it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Elena. Yes. I need you to know. He stopped, steadied. What I feel is not a contract condition. It's not strategic. It's not the version of me that plans and prepares and maps 4 moves ahead. He looked at her with everything visible, nothing managed. I see you, he said. I saw you the first night, at the end of that table, and I haven't stopped. She heard it differently than her father's version of those words. Completely differently. Her father's, I see you, had been admissions apology, the recognition of a man arriving too late. Adrian's was something else entirely. It was present tense, active, ongoing. Not I finally noticed. But I have been looking since the beginning, and I will keep looking. She stood up from this table. He watched her. She walked around to his side, and she stood there, and she reached out and put her hand against the side of his face, and he closed his eyes just for a second, like a man receiving something he'd stopped letting himself expect. "I see you too," she said. "I've been seeing you since that study, since not the way I notice most things, since breakfast in the courthouse, in the diner, and all the rest of it." She pulled her hand back. "Don't make me another contract. Just be honest with me, every time, the way you have been." "Always," he said. The word came immediately, without hesitation. She nodded, sat back down, picked up her glass. "Now, Mafia," she said, "are we finishing dinner or not?" He laughed, a real one, not the controlled, almost smile she'd cataloged in the early weeks, but a full, genuine laugh that she hadn't heard from him before, and that rearranged something permanently in her understanding of who he was. "Yes," he said, "we're finishing dinner." The 12th month came and passed. No paperwork, no attorney calls, no quiet dissolution filed in a courthouse somewhere. Just a morning that arrived the same as the one before it and the one before that, and all the ones that had made up this life she was building with her own hands, in her own name, by her own choices. She was on the foundation's full board by then. Irene had pushed for it, and Elena had accepted without false modesty, because false modesty was another thing she'd left behind with the chair by the kitchen. The literacy initiative had expanded to 3 additional neighborhoods. The grant she'd written had been renewed and doubled. Victoria called on a Thursday just to talk, which was new between them and fragile and real. They were building something different than what they'd had, not the old hierarchy of visible and invisible, chosen and forgotten, but something that required both of them to show up as actual people. It was harder than the old version. It was better. Her mother called on a Sunday, as promised, without conditions. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, a recipe, a neighbor, a television show, and Elena understood that this was its own kind of progress. Small and ordinary and enough. Her father sent flowers on her birthday. No note, just flowers. She put them in water. Let them mean what they could. And on an ordinary evening in what would have been month 13 of a 12-month contract, Elena Whitmore, who had been seated at the far end of every table, in the background of every photograph, in the shadow of every version of her family's story, sat in a house that was hers by choice and not by assignment, across from a man who had seen her first and kept looking and understood something simple and enormous and true. She had not been rescued. She had not been chosen in the way her family understood choosing, as a prize awarded a position, filled a role, assigned to the most qualified candidate. She had been offered a door, and she had walked through it herself, and on the other side she had built with her own hands and her own voice, and the quiet, extraordinary power of a woman who had stopped making herself small in actual life. Not her family's life, not the life they had scripted for her, or the one they had ignored her into, or the one they would have chosen if they'd ever bothered to look. Hers, completely, irrevocably, magnificently hers. And that was the thing nobody at that dinner table had seen coming. Not her father, not her mother, not Victoria in her midnight blue, not Marcus Castellan with his leverage and his warm, dishonest eyes. Not one of them had looked at the woman at the end of the table near the kitchen where the noise was and thought, there she is. There is the one to watch. But she had always been there. She had always been exactly this. It had simply taken the right door and the courage to walk through it, to let the rest of the world finally catch up to what Elena Whitmore had always quietly already known about herself. She was not someone's shadow. She never had been. She was the light that cast it.